The hum of the engine was a melody Jack Roadrunner Thompson knew well, a steady rhythm that carried him through the endless stretch of the Midwest interstate. Trucker life promised freedom, but as Jack drove his Anteater, a Kenworth T600, he couldn't shake the weight of solitude pressing against him. The empty passenger seat beside him wasn't just vacant. It was a reminder of Maya's absence. He missed her laughter, her warmth, but all he had now was the quiet company of the open road. Jack reached for the CB mic. "Got your ears on?" "Roadrunner, this is Buster Brown, keeping it shiny side up," a crackling voice replied, breaking the silence for a moment. The brief camaraderie of the radio was a lifeline, but it never lasted long. Deadlines loomed large, as always. Jack was hauling equipment, 1,000 miles to go before dawn, if he wanted to stay on schedule. The unspoken rule of trucking: drive hard, sleep little, deliver fast. A flash of debris on the shoulder, an alligator, a torn strip of tire, caught his eye. The road was unpredictable, a fact Jack knew too well. Moments later, a violent thump jolted the cab. The Anteater shook, forcing him to ease off the throttle and pull onto the shoulder. "Damn it," he muttered, stepping out to inspect the damage. It didn't take long to spot the culprit: a blown tire. Jack crouched beside the shredded rubber, sighing. Fixing it wasn't the problem. It was the hours it would cost him. But out here, there was no choice. He grabbed his tools and got to work, stabilizing the truck and cranking the jack until the wheel lifted off the ground. Dirt clung to his hands as he loosened the lug nuts, a gritty reminder of the sacrifices this life demanded. "Come on," he coaxed, sweat dripping as he slid the spare into place. The job was dirty, thankless, and routine, a perfect reflection of the grind that defined his life on the road. Yet as Jack secured the last lug nut, he couldn't ignore the ache in his chest, the longing for connection that felt just out of reach. Back in the cab, Jack turned the key, the engine rumbling to life. "Keep rolling," he muttered, merging back onto the highway. The darkness settled around him, the miles ahead offering little comfort. He swiped a hand over his eyes, clearing the fatigue, and focused on the horizon. Out here, there was no time for second-guessing, only the road and the weight of his thoughts. Truckers were kings of the highway, but every mile came with its burdens. Jack knew this better than most. The road didn't care about the past or the loneliness creeping in. It only demanded you keep moving. And so, with the hum of the engine as his only companion, Jack drove on into the night. Jack parked his Anteater, a Kenworth T600, under the bright neon glow of the truck stop sign. The hum of idling engines and faint chatter filled the air, a familiar buzz that wrapped around him like a warm blanket after hours of isolation. This was a second home for road warriors like him, a temporary reprieve from the grind. He climbed out, stretching muscles stiff from too many miles. Today had been rough: a blown tire, a ticking clock, and a growing sense of unease. What he needed was coffee strong enough to strip paint and maybe a slice of pie to remind him life wasn't all bad. Stepping into the diner, Jack's eyes landed on Maya, her laughter catching him off guard. For a moment, the sound made his heart skip, but then he noticed the man leaning too close to her, a fellow driver, his charm radiating like heat. Jack's stomach tightened. Just his luck. "Maya," he greeted, forcing a smile as he approached. "Jack." She looked up, her eyes lighting briefly before dimming again. "You made it?" "Yeah, just rolled in. Long haul. Blew a tire on the way." He slid into the booth across from her, trying to ignore the other driver's lingering presence. "Classic Roadrunner," she said with a faint smile. The nickname hit a nerve, too much a reminder of the growing distance between them. "What brings you out here?" he asked, keeping his tone light. "Just restocking," she replied, glancing around as if searching for an exit. "You know how it is, always moving." He nodded. "Doesn't it get lonely, missing home, family?" Her expression faltered. "It does. I think about my daughter every mile." She hesitated, her voice softening. "But it's complicated." Jack leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You know you don't have to carry it all alone, right? I'm here." She looked at him, her gaze flickering toward the other driver before settling back. The moment stretched, heavy with things left unsaid. "I should go," she said abruptly, standing. Jack's chest tightened. "Maya, wait. We just started talking." "I know, but I need time." she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll call you, I promise." Before he could respond, the door swung open, letting in a gust of cold air and a baby bear, a rookie cop, who walked in with a confident stride. Maya glanced at him, decision made, and slipped past Jack without another word. Jack sat there, the hollow ache in his chest morphing into something harder. He glanced around the diner, suddenly feeling more like a ghost than a trucker. "What's the point?" he muttered under his breath. Relationships felt fragile, like threads stretched too thin by the miles. He flagged down a waitress. "Coffee, black." "Coming right up," she said with a grin, pouring him a steaming cup. Jack stared into the swirling liquid, his thoughts running in circles. He remembered the plans he and Maya had made, dreams of shared adventures under starry skies. But those nights felt far away now, replaced by the cold reality of the road. Draining the last of his coffee, Jack pushed himself to his feet. The hum of conversation and clatter of dishes faded into the background as he focused on the horizon ahead. "Keep rolling, Roadrunner," he muttered to himself. There was no sense dwelling on shadows. The road was calling, and Jack wasn't one to ignore its pull. He stepped outside, the cool night air biting at his skin, and climbed back into his rig. The engine roared to life, a steady companion in an uncertain world. The night was young, and the open road awaited. Maya Johnson's hands gripped the wheel like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. The growl of the engine filled the cab, but it wasn't enough to drown out the noise in her head. The road stretched endlessly before her, dark and unyielding, mirroring the choices she wasn't ready to face. Her daughter's laughter echoed in her mind, bright, innocent, and achingly distant. Every mile felt like another piece of herself being left behind, a trade-off she wasn't sure was worth it. She had entered the trucking world with fire and determination, eager to prove she could hold her own in a male-dominated industry. But somewhere along the way, that fire had burned down to embers, leaving only the cold, hollow weight of loneliness. The CB radio crackled to life. "Hammer down, folks. Clear skies and smooth stretches ahead," came the voice of Ben Big Rig Harrison. A moment's hesitation, then Maya picked up the mic. She shouldn't, she knew it. But the pull of connection, however fleeting, was too strong. 10-4, Big Rig, she replied, rolling on, keeping it between the ditches. A pause, then Ben's voice softened. "You doing okay out there, Maya?" The question hit harder than she expected. When was the last time anyone had truly asked her that? "Yeah," she lied, "just another long haul." "You know," Ben said, his tone easy but pointed, "you don't have to carry it all alone." His words settled heavily in her chest. He wasn't just offering a friendly ear, he was offering an escape, a way out of the life she'd built but no longer felt at home in. For a moment, the promise tempted her, but then she thought of Jack, of his steady presence, the plans they'd made, the way his face lit up when they talked about their future, and she thought of her daughter, who needed her to be strong. "It's complicated," Maya said finally, her voice tight. "Life always is," Ben replied, warm but knowing. Maya set the mic down, letting the static fill the cab. The road ahead blurred into darkness, her high beams cutting through it like a knife. She was exhausted, of the double life, of the lies she couldn't outrun. Ben was both a lifeline and a weight dragging her down, offering freedom at a cost she wasn't sure she could pay. Her daughter's face flashed in her mind, twisting guilt in her stomach. What kind of mother was she to chase after something that could only bring more pain? The dashboard clock ticked forward, marking time she couldn't reclaim. She needed to make a decision, but every choice felt like giving up a part of herself. The familiar glow of a truck stop sign broke through the night. Maya swung her rig into place alongside the sleeping giants in the lot, their low rumbling engines adding to the quiet hum of the night. She climbed out of the cab, letting the cool air hit her skin as she stared up at the scattered stars. The beauty only made her feel lonelier. With a sigh, she walked toward the diner, her boots crunching on the gravel. The place was mostly empty, late-night travelers nursing cups of coffee and plates of pie. Maya slid into a booth by the window where she and Jack had sat earlier. His voice lingered in her mind, full of quiet concern. his eyes asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. Maya wrapped her hands around the coffee the waitress brought her, the warmth grounding her. She stared out at the night, trying to quiet the chaos in her mind. The road was always calling, but tonight it felt more like a trap. Jack Roadrunner Thompson rolled into the truck stop, his Kenworth T600 growling low as it came to rest in a sea of parked rigs. The lot buzzed with life, diesel engines humming like a tired chorus, drivers stretching their legs, and the faint clatter of dishes from the diner. He cut the engine, letting the tick-tick of the cooling metal fill the silence. The CB chatter from earlier echoed in his mind, Maya and Big Rig. It wasn't like Jack to dwell on gossip, but he couldn't shake the unease. He rubbed a hand over his face, the grit of the road and the weight of suspicion pressing down on him. The rig needed fuel. He needed a reset. Maybe a shower would help. Gravel crunched under his boots as he made his way to the showers. The faint aroma of fried food wafted from the diner, but Jack wasn't hungry, not for food anyway. He passed the usual mix of drivers and fringe characters, the kind of people who lived on the edge of the trucking world. Jack knew their type, hard lives written on harder faces. Inside, the sound of water echoed off the tiled walls. He was about to claim the last stall when a woman caught his eye. She leaned casually against the wall, her practiced smile sharp as a blade. Jack knew the offer before she even opened her mouth. "Need some company, cowboy?" Her voice was low, smooth, and inviting. Jack hesitated. This wasn't his thing, never had been. But tonight felt different. The road seemed endless, and the hole Maya had left behind felt bigger than ever. Maybe this was just what he needed to forget, even if only for a little while. "Yeah," he said finally, his voice rough. "Why not?" She led him into the stall without fanfare. The encounter was fast, impersonal, an exchange of need, nothing more. No pretense, no strings. When it was over, Jack handed her some cash without a second thought. She pocketed it with a nod, her sharp smile returning. "Take care, cowboy," she said with a wink, before disappearing into the corridor. Jack stayed under the pounding water long after she left, letting the heat soak into his muscles. It wasn't cleansing, not really, but it dulled the edges of his thoughts for a moment. By the time he toweled off and got dressed, the weight of reality had crept back in. Maya. Big Rig. The road didn't leave much room for peace. He slid into a booth at the diner, the familiar buzz of voices surrounding him. His phone buzzed. Another fuel price update. Jack scowled. The numbers were climbing every day, squeezing independent operators like him. He flagged down the waitress and ordered his usual. "Black coffee," he said, "strong enough to wake the dead." The steaming mug arrived, and Jack took a long sip, the bitterness grounding him. He glanced around at the other drivers, some hunched over meals, others exchanging quiet conversation. They were a tough lot, but he knew they carried their own burdens. Miles of loneliness, tight deadlines, families left behind. The road wasn't kind, but it didn't stop them. It never stopped. As he drained his coffee, Jack's thoughts drifted back to Maya. He couldn't ignore the whispers, the lingering doubt. What was he supposed to do when he saw her next? Confront her? Demand answers? Or let it slide, pretending it didn't matter? None of the options felt right, but he knew one thing for sure. The road always caught up with you, no matter how fast you ran. Jack stood and tossed a few bills on the table. The hum of his rig awaited, the open road stretching endlessly ahead. Whatever lay at the next stop, he'd face it 1 mile at a time. Maya Johnson guided her truck effortlessly, her focus sharp and unyielding. The black stretch of highway ahead felt less like freedom and more like a trap tonight, each passing mile tightening the noose around her. Outside, the Texas plains blurred into a smear of darkness, interrupted only by the faint glow of distant towns. Alone out here, her thoughts were louder than the engine's steady growl. A familiar song played from her media player, 6 Days on the Road by Dave Dudley, her father's favorite. She could almost hear his gruff voice singing along, the memory bittersweet. That song, like so many things, was all she had left of simpler times. Maya's mind wandered to Ben. The mess she'd created with him had spiraled out of control. He wasn't just another trucker anymore. He'd become too much, a complication she couldn't seem to untangle. When her phone buzzed, she already knew who it was. She hesitated, staring at the screen. She shouldn't answer. Every time she did, she sank deeper into something she couldn't clean up. But Ben understood her. Or maybe he was just there when Jack wasn't. Swallowing a sigh, she swiped to answer. "Yeah," she said, her voice tight. "Maya, where are you at?" Ben's smooth tone made her grip the wheel harder. "Rolling through Texas, you?" "Same. Thought we could meet up, just to talk." She knew better, but she also knew she'd go. "Where?" "There's a truck stop near Amarillo. I'll text you." Maya tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and slapped her hands against the wheel. How had she let it get this far? It wasn't just the physical connection with Ben. It was the way he made her feel seen. But that shouldn't be enough. Not when Jack was steady, reliable, and undeserving of her betrayal. The thought of Jack finding out made her stomach churn. Pulling into the truck stop, she parked a few rigs away from Ben's. The familiar hum of engines and chatter surrounded her, but it felt heavier tonight. Climbing out of her cab, she spotted him leaning against his truck, grinning like he owned the place. "Hey," he said casually as she approached. "Hey," Maya replied, her voice strained. "We need to talk." The grin faded. He nodded and motioned for them to step away from the crowd. Maya's heart pounded as she searched for the words. "Ben, whatever this is, it has to stop," she said, meeting his gaze. "It's wrong. I can't keep doing this to Jack." Ben tilted his head, studying her. "Are you sure? Because if you were happy with Jack, we wouldn't be here, would we?" His words struck a nerve. Anger flared in her chest. "This isn't about being happy. It's about doing what's right." "Is it? Or is it about what's easy?" His tone was soft, almost mocking. Maya shook her head, trying to steady herself. "Ben, I'm done." He let out a breath, shrugging. "If that's what you want. But don't think Jack's going to take it well when he finds out." Her stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" Ben smirked, colder now. "Word travels fast out here. Someone's bound to spill the beans, and when they do, Jack's not going to be happy." Maya stiffened. "I'll handle it myself." Ben's shrug was nonchalant, but his words lingered. "Secrets have a way of coming out, Maya. Better sooner than later." She turned and walked back to her truck, her thoughts a tangled mess. Facing Jack would hurt, but it was better than him finding out from someone else. He deserved at least that much honesty. Climbing into the cab, she took a deep breath, trying to clear her mind. The engine's purr filled the silence, but it couldn't drown out her guilt. The night blurred into dawn as Maya drove, the dimly lit highway stretching endlessly ahead. She knew she had to tell Jack the truth. It would hurt them both, but there was no other way forward. Beyond that, she had no answers, just the road, winding and uncertain. Jack, Roadrunner Thompson, finally approached the delivery site, its flickering lights cutting through the night like a beacon. The relief should have been palpable, but all he felt was the weight of everything it had taken to get here. It was as though every setback imaginable had conspired to test him. First, the blown tires. Wrestling with the jack and lug nuts had eaten precious time, and Jack's patience had worn thin. Then came the fuel leak, diesel dripping like sand through an hourglass. His patch job had been rushed and barely held, leaving him gambling with every mile. The engine sputtered and coughed like a smoker past his prime, but Jack had kept going. Quitting wasn't an option. He had bigger plans. Dreams of a trucking company with his name on the side of every rig, a fleet that would outlast him. But tonight, those dreams felt as distant as the stars above. Instead, all he could think about was how heavy the road had become. Not just the physical miles, but the weight of what waited at every stop. And then there was Maya. She'd been on his mind the entire run, a distraction he couldn't afford but couldn't shake. The silence between them screamed louder than any argument. Jack wasn't naive. He knew something was wrong. Out here, trust was fragile, melting away like snow in the sun. And Jack had heard enough stories to know how easily it could slip through your fingers. He tightened his grip on the wheel, forcing himself to focus. The delivery was almost done, and soon he could leave the cargo and the doubts behind, at least for a while. But as the lights of the site grew brighter, his thoughts drifted back to the same unanswered questions. Pulling into the lot, Jack climbed out of his rig, stretching the stiffness from his muscles. The crew moved quickly to unload, but his mind was already elsewhere. He thought of Maya and the crossroads she seemed to be standing at. He didn't know where her head was, but he knew her daughter was always a factor. That much he couldn't fault her for. Then there was Ben. Jack clenched his jaw at the thought. Once a good friend, Ben had become a ghost of their past, lurking in the corners of everything Jack wanted to leave behind. Their fractured connection made the road ahead feel that much harder to navigate. With the last of the cargo unloaded, Jack climbed back into the cab, his body heavy with exhaustion. But it wasn't just the physical toll. It was the weight of everything hanging over him. Maya, Ben, the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Turning the key, Jack felt the familiar rumble of the engine beneath him. The open road stretched out before him, endless and dark. He exhaled, gripping the wheel as he pulled out of the lot. He was at a crossroads, his route, his life, everything hanging in the balance. Decisions had to be made. Soon, because the road didn't wait. Neither did life. The trucking convention buzzed with life, engines roaring, guitar twangs drifting from the stage, and the smell of diesel mixing with fried food. Trucks gleamed under the bright lights, chrome polished to perfection, as drivers swapped stories of the road. It was a celebration of the kings of the highway, but for Jack Roadrunner Thompson, it felt like a battlefield. Across the lot, Ben leaned casually against a polished Kenworth W900, its deep blue paint reflecting the lights like a mirror. He chatted easily, his smooth smile masking the tension in his posture. Jack's blood boiled at the sight. For weeks he'd been haunted by Ben's shadow, his betrayal, and seeing him so at ease only fueled the fire. Jack clenched his fists, forcing himself to walk toward the man who had turned his life upside down. Ben noticed him and straightened, his easy demeanor slipping as he dismissed the other driver. The two men faced off amidst the hum of engines and distant music. "Jack," Ben said, keeping his voice neutral, "didn't think I'd see you here." Jack's jaw tightened. "We've got unfinished business." Ben raised his hands slightly, a placating gesture. "We do, but this is bigger than us." "It's just business, Jack. You know that." Jack's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "Business? You called dragging Maya into this business? You made it personal." Ben's calm cracked. "Maya's got nothing to do with this. Bull, you used her to get to me. You couldn't stand seeing me happy, so you had to ruin it." Ben's expression darkened, his tone sharpening. "This was never about you. It's about what's best. For all of us." Jack stepped closer, his voice low but seething. "You don't get to decide what's best for me, Ben. And you sure as hell don't get to use Maya to do it." The mention of her name lit a spark between them, igniting months of pent-up anger. Jack's fist flew, connecting with Ben's jaw in a sickening thud. Ben staggered but retaliated, and the two men crashed to the ground in a flurry of fists and dirt. It wasn't just a fight, it was a reckoning. Blood splattered as they grappled, the world around them fading into a blur of rage and adrenaline. Jack's ribs burned from a hard blow, but he pushed through the pain, driven by the betrayal that had cut him deeper than any punch. Ben swung again, his fist catching Jack's cheek. They rolled, each man struggling for dominance, their movements growing more desperate with each passing second. Jack's focus narrowed to one goal, making Ben feel every ounce of the hurt he'd caused. Finally, Jack pinned Ben to the ground, his fist raised for another strike. But before he could swing, a voice pierced the chaos. "Jack, stop, please, stop!" It was Maya, her voice trembling as she pushed through the crowd. She dropped to her knees beside them, her eyes wide with horror. "Jack, this isn't the way." Jack froze, her plea cutting through the red haze in his mind. He looked down at Ben, beaten and bloody, and slowly lowered his fist. Exhaustion overtook him as he stood wiping the blood from his face with the back of his hand. His eyes met Ben's, cold and unyielding. "It's over," Jack said, his voice hard. "Whatever this was, it's done." Ben didn't respond. He lay in the dirt, his face a mix of bruises and shame, his silence saying more than words ever could. The fight was over, but the damage was permanent. Jack turned to Maya. Tears streaked her dusty cheeks as she looked at him, pleading silently for something. Maybe forgiveness, maybe hope, but Jack was too far gone for either. "You both can go to hell," he said, his voice icy. "I'm done." Without another word, Jack walked away, ignoring the stares of the gathered truckers as he made his way to his rig. The familiar sight of his Kenworth T600, its rich red paint gleaming under the lights, brought a strange sense of calm. It was his sanctuary, the only place that made sense anymore. Climbing into the cab, Jack felt his phone buzz. A new message lit up the screen. An offer for a coast-to-coast run with big money, no questions asked. It was the kind of job he'd dreamed of, and he accepted without hesitation. It didn't matter where it led, as long as it took him away from everything behind him. The engine roared to life, its deep rumble steadying him as he pulled out of the lot. The open road stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of possibilities. For the first time in weeks, Jack felt a sense of peace. Maya and Ben were part of a past he was leaving behind, their echoes fading as the highway swallowed him. Maya watched him go, regret and sorrow weighing heavily on her. She turned to Ben, who was still struggling to get up, and felt nothing but a deep, aching sadness. Without a word, she walked away, her thoughts already on her daughter and the home she'd neglected. Family was all that mattered now, the one truth she could hold on to. As Jack drove into the night, the miles ahead seemed lighter. The road was unforgiving, but it was home. It was where he belonged.